Good evening. Do you hear me? Thank you all for joining us. Tonight marks the start of a new salon-style interview series we have developed in an effort to examine how business, technology, and design will directly impact our collective future in Michigan and beyond. We call it Future Proof. The name was inspired by the heart of what we do here at Lawrence Technological University. We are working to prepare students at all levels for education, for job titles that do not even exist yet. From our innovative K-12 programs, early middle college, and dual enrollment opportunities that lead directly into university degree programs and our growing professional development certifications, LTU is supporting students all along their education journey. As one of 13 private, comprehensive doctoral and technological universities in the country, we are providing more opportunities for a high-quality STEM-based education and making sure that that education is accessible through scholarships and other supporting programs. Our Innovative Pathways initiative sets the course for a 5-year plan to achieve this goal, including upping our enrollment by approximately 35%. For this serious future proof, we aim to provide a new forum that examines what the future of this region has in store for all of us. We will bring together a wide array of experts representing innovation, professions, and industries from everything, including engineering and manufacturing to architecture and design, business, healthcare, sustainability, and emerging form of information technology and computing. It all begins tonight. For the next hour, we will hear from expert panelists as we seek answers to issues with global implications. From our first installment, we chose to consider the impact of economic development and imagine what this region might look like by the year 2050. That's no coincidence. At Lawrence Tech, we are proud to say that more than any other Michigan university, our students graduate and tend to stay, work, and live in Michigan. If our statistics are right, approximately 83% of our graduates year after year stay within the state of Michigan. They also enjoy the highest starting salaries of any university within the state, which is a feat that we are, as you can tell, very proud of. That kind of talent and commitment contributes to a strong economy. It's a point of pride for us. Future Proof, the series, was developed at LTU as part of our presidential colloquium series. Events in the series that will examine a wide variety of topics, and at the helm, I'd like to introduce our host for tonight. My good friend, Ed Clemente, is currently working as Senior Advisor for Trends and Development with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Prior to this role, he was appointed to 2 terms as a Michigan Liquor Control Commissioner, proudly served as a state representative, co-founded the Michigan Energy Innovative Business Council, and he's held the positions of Wayne County Community College Trustee and President of the Southern Wayne County Chamber of Commerce. You may know him best as the current host of the popular Michigan Opportunity podcast. We are so pleased to have him lead our discussion tonight. Please join me in welcoming our host, Ed Clemente.
So you should be able to hear me. They will hear it. So it's live at the moment, but you guys can figure that out when we get to it. Just real quickly, I'm going to ask the first question, but I'll also introduce you while I'm asking the first question. So I just wanted to sort of set the tone for a little bit. Thank you, President. And I want to thank also Chris and Stephanie who helped put this on today, and hopefully the additional series when we get to them, and we'll be doing some announcements with those. But I'm going to kind of start out a little bit with a quote, and it's a paraphrase of a quote. But technology always advances, but humanity stays the same. So that's sort of the problem I think that we're running into in society in general, is that we don't know how to process so much, and AI is going to change everything again. So how are we adjusting as society as technology keeps moving faster than we do? And a lot of it ties into economic development, as both Cynthia and Maureen both try to track businesses and work with businesses. And as RJ will write about them, we're trying to figure out how, not just Michigan, but I like to always use the phrase, it's how Michigan sees the world, and we have a lot of international folks here today, but it's also how the world sees Michigan. And Michigan tends to be, because we're a Midwest state, we tend to be a little bit more myopic, I think, than like East Coast and West Coast states somewhat. So we tend to be a little bit more defensive maybe in the Midwest, but at the same time, we actually have a lot of great competitive advantages, and that's what we'll hear a little bit about tonight. And the reason, as I say, Dr. Sobe and I talked about this originally, is because I do this podcast. And I've done 230 guests now. And I asked them at least two questions that are helpful for tonight. One is, what future trends do you see coming up in your industry? Because it changes even from quarter to quarter and year to year sometimes. But also, I also asked, what would you go back and tell your 17-year-old self? So that's why we kind of focus on 2050. So I listen to like the BBC a lot and The Economist, and you always hear like, who knows what the COP 20 is? Have you ever heard of the COP 20? It's well, I know Cynthia probably knows it, but you also know about Davos. But every country seems to say we want to do 2050 to be net zero or to be this. And Michigan doesn't really, it's hard for both private sector, public sector, higher education, nonprofits, and even media to a strong degree, don't understand how economic development sort of works. So that's the main reason we're here. And so maybe in 30 years from now, maybe someone that's not even born yet, hopefully will be in a good position because of the foundation that these three people will talk about is what we're trying to lay and this university does, so that someone then will just say, like, just like the DIA or the Detroit Riverwalk, someone did that a long time before, I was born, and these things were coming about. And that's the thing. I don't know who did the DIA. I don't know. I didn't know the Riverwalk. But in general, it's not so much credit for the individuals. It's more about just someone did it, so people could take advantage of it, and so they could appreciate it more. So with that, I'm going to start out with your first question, and it's really just for each of you to just give maybe about a minute or so about what your organization does. And we'll start with, I want to say Maureen, and she's with the Detroit Regional Partnership, but we've worked together on many projects, even when she was at Oakland County and with the Detroit Chamber especially. But also, she's just someone that also has a great story, and I think she'll do it not in this question, but eventually from her stories in Indiana too. And she just got back from a Brookings conference, and you spoke at it, right? And that was in Washington, D.C. just yesterday. So anyway, Maureen, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what the DRP does?
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Dr. Sobe, for your leadership in having these conversations, because they are very important. We get very focused on what's right in front of us or what 200 emails we got today, but really we do need to be thoughtful and spend time on the future. So I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Regional Partnership. We are not 5 years old yet, so we're kind of one of the new kids, but we really evolved from the Detroit Regional Chamber. We represent the city of Detroit and the 11-county region around it, so that's about 5.5 million Michigan residents, over half the state's population. Very simply, our job is to market, grow, and support the region. Our team travels globally to bring new companies, new jobs, and new investment to this region. We have a couple of really strong initiatives that I can't get to in 2 minutes, but the one that I hope I get to is our global epicenter of mobility, which I think really exemplifies what I want to see as a future trend on how our region works together.
All right. And then we'll go to RJ, and he is the only person in this room that bowled at my family's restaurant. But he's also a publisher, I think 5 books or 6 books?
6.
6 books, and he publishes a magazine, D-Business. But you also, I knew him originally when he was a beat reporter for Detroit News, right?
Business writer for
Business,
News.
yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the portfolio you work with now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I grew up here to the north near Birmingham, and my dad worked for Ford. I have 6 sisters, 2 brothers, and now 28 nieces and nephews. And we're all going through college. It's pretty amazing. All of us that are of my generation went to college and graduated. So I could write my way through school. I got on the business staff at the Detroit News right out of school. In 1990, after graduating from U of M Dearborn, and my brother went here though and got a mechanical engineering degree. And so I stayed there for 16 years and then left after the Super Bowl and joined up with a company called Our Media, H-O-U-R. And we started up D-Business Magazine, which is a regional business publication. In addition to that, we have D-Business Daily News, which comes out 5 times a week, Monday through Friday. We recently started a Monday newsletter called Hustle and Muscle, which spotlights startups in Michigan as well as investment communities. So the private equity firms, the family funds, the angel investors, venture capital, and others. And then we have an annual publication called Detroit 500, which Dr. Sopp is in, and Maureen, and the top 500 business leaders in Metro Detroit. And then the 6 books that I've written, probably the most germane here is called Detroit, Engine of America, which tells the story of how Detroit went from a French fort in 1701 up to 1900 to become the birthplace of the auto industry, so that 200 years of history here that nobody really knows. Detroit is the oldest city in the Midwest. It's older than Chicago, Indianapolis, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. It's even older than Buffalo. So anybody moving west from the East Coast back in those days would portage their way to the western edge of Lake Ontario, get on a ship. There was no Cleveland, there was no Toledo. They would just come to Detroit, and we just built up the world's largest manufacturing economy. And I could go on, but I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll keep going.
So let's go to Cynthia, and I should mention too that both Cynthia and Maureen have been on the podcast, but I actually interviewed one of RJ's guests, Chris Muller, who did the book on Chernobyl.
Sure.
Who's also the Swiss honorary council.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so go ahead, Cynthia, sorry.
He's got a lot of interesting people in his world. So thank you. I'm Cynthia Hutchison. And thank you, Dr. Silver, for doing this, because this is not something every university does, and it's really an important initiative to get. Also, I may be looking at the generational gaps we have. Like, it's important to pull us all together. I have a very different background from those you just heard. First of all, I'm not from Michigan. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I've lived in D.C. and New York, and have settled in Michigan now for quite some time. So it's now home. But I also have a different background. I started my career in technology, and I ended up was running the IBM account for North America out of New York. And when I took a leave of absence to have my children, my youngest was born with Down syndrome, and I decided to take some of the energy I had and expend it. And, I was selling at a very high level, and I thought, I'm not afraid to call executives. I can call executives and find out how they'll hire people with disabilities. Why did they not hire them? What would it take? And I really learned a lot about there was no evil guy trying to avoid people with disabilities. There were a lot of people who never met each other, i.e. people even in wheelchairs didn't meet executives. There's no pathway. So it's ironic, I tell you that in short. Let me tell you, I ended up running a nonprofit for about 20 years, and that's where you and I first met. You were at the fundraiser many years. Thank you. So he supported it. And what we did was, but all the skills that I learned in doing that were really led by the passion. This impacted my son. So the passion of writing a legislator, I don't know that I would have been where I am today in my career had I not started that, because as much as I love the technology and want to work for tech companies, I don't know that I would have been as motivated to say we need to shape policy that's more successful for everybody, and that's a bit of what I do now. So now I fast forward, worked for Automation Alley for many years, and had an opportunity to partner with the World Economic Forum. So we launched the first And it'll be the only advanced manufacturing center in the US partnered with the World Economic Forum. They're great partners. It gave me tremendous visibility and insight into how things are done at the global level. So we take the global story, bring it to the US, interpret it for the US, lead it out of Michigan. And to your point about, you can't sit and say we're in Michigan, when we're in California and they say, oh, where are you based? Michigan. So wherever we are, we're still based in Michigan. So it gives that Michigan thing without being so forward. So it's an exciting opportunity to bridge together what's happening globally to what's happening regionally and how we can improve our manufacturing capabilities as a nation.
Why don't you just give a short definition of advanced manufacturing?
It's really, in my opinion, it's when technology overlays all of the things in our lives. We'll talk later, I'm sure, about architecture. You look at the fact that we've done things in a certain way forever. You've built a house in a certain way, and now there's a new way to build it, but it's done because technology is the driver. So the trick is getting people who are leveraged in position and committed to their position and kind of wed to how they've done it, to learn to do it, to not be afraid of the technology, but embrace it and say, this is an enabler. So to get away from that, it's changing my life into this is enabling. And I think that's where we are with AI right now, is the fear is driving as opposed to the enabling.
Yeah, when I was on a panel just recently with Automation Alley about AI, it was interesting how people were saying, well, we need to make sure we write legislation at the state to control it. And I'm like, it's not going to be like a tsunami. It's not going to be something you can control. You'd be better off building a surfboard, to figure out how to ride the wave than figure out how to fight it or think you can control it. And the one thing I think I brought up in that ties into what you're saying is almost every small business may probably need a consultant for AI, but I think if you're a decent sized business, you better have an AI vice president just working on just how to navigate as this starts going through. And that came from a guest I had from the west side of the state. He's a Microsoft influencer, and he was found because AI found him because he published so much stuff. And then a human called him up and said, oh, we'd like to have you be a Microsoft influencer and start publishing our stuff and we'll pay you for it. And so it's like, it's just moving almost like reverse now. Anyway, just a quick thing too, just get back to economic development, I'll come back to Maureen, but people always ask me all the time, because I've done economic development things my whole career, but what do you consider your short definition of what is economic development? Because I think it's different for everybody almost sometimes.
It really is, and economic development to me is influencing job growth and investment in the community based on the desires of the community. And I think that's really critical that, so our region has 348 cities, villages, and townships. And I always say that's a lot of children to love, right? Because they're all different. They all want different things. And when I had a couple of years in Phoenix, my community wanted spring training baseball, right? And they wanted car dealerships because they were driven by sales tax revenue, not property tax. So we would fight over car dealerships, and I thought, I hope my friends in Michigan don't see this. It's embarrassing that I'm fighting for car dealerships. But it has to be what the community desires to be the most successful.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you think it is, RJ?
Well, I look at it as new development that comes into the state, or new money, investment, and then enhancing what you have. So you've got the office market, residential market, hotels, industrial parks, restaurants, entertainment, all of that. And a good example of something that's coming that's going to be an economic driver is this new soccer stadium that's being proposed west of Michigan Central, which is going to open up next month. But the soccer stadium will not only drive revenue, it's going to have about 14,000 seats, so there's going to be all kind of money spent to build the thing, design the thing, and open it and operate it. But the team's coming here. Tom Gores has the MLS franchise for Detroit, so I'm hearing that he will bring an MLS team here. So now you're starting to get into hotel and restaurant spending. So that's what I look at it as.
And because these people are masters and mistresses of this, managing the actual economic development, I'm on the other side of it, I think, where it's trying to figure out how to draw, what does it take to draw people? Maureen does the analytics, and then once they're here, I want to make sure that we're working with people like Tarek, where we're putting together the right support, because if you don't capitalize, these opportunities come and go, and the opportunities land, and we don't have the talent to support it, then the opportunity to rise up. The other thing that I think people like Maureen really, what I don't know, struggle with might not be right, but when I read that there's a $250 million MEDC allotment going towards the Flint area, it seems like a good thing. It's 1,000 acres, which also seems like a good thing, because we can put an advanced manufacturing plant in that space. And then, the last paragraph of the article talks about the community uprising because it's going to change their community. So I'm guessing the uprisers have jobs, because 1,000 jobs coming into Flint is a big deal. So I think economic development is that running that thin line between, to Maureen's point, what does the community want, but sometimes teaching them what they need. So there's an element of that where we work closely with academics to teach people what they need and make sure that we're continually having the right frame of mind to accept what opportunities come at us. I think that might be a differentiator we see in some states are very good at accepting what comes at them and rolling with it. And we seem to occasionally dig in a little bit.
Well, that'll dovetail a little bit, but I was on that call yesterday for the Michigan Strategic Fund. There was almost 200 people on the call. I think there was about 70 people talking, both pro. Were you on that call yesterday? Well, you probably were.
No, I was talking in DC.
Yeah,
I
yes.
missed it. I missed all the
Thank
fun.
God you missed it. I didn't listen to the whole thing. But I mean, the majority were people were for it. And that's some of the challenges of economic development is, do you do it on a preponderance of leadership, or do you have to be almost like a profile and courage sometimes to really do that extra project that maybe not everyone wants, but in the long run, getting to the 2050 thing, if you're trying to look at 2050, you have to be thinking strategically, and it's very different and we have someone from SEMCOG, Megan's here, but like that's all they do is SEMCOG, is try to figure out, you guys have 2050 plans too, don't you? Yeah. So, there is people doing it, but there's so many other moving parts. So why do you think it is, and maybe this is the NIMBY question, but why is it usually a problem? Why do people have a problem with economic development? Just each of you can maybe give a shout at that.
Well, we've had a couple of really bad instances in the state that are still going on. The Goshen project in the Grand Rapids area, even the Ford project in Marshall, and the GM joint venture with LG in Lansing are three that, I never imagined my peers would be getting death threats, and that they would have to go to meetings in hoodies so people wouldn't see what they look like. And, we had one instance up in Lansing where someone took pictures of everyone's license plate at the end of the meeting. So we're very careful about this. We have not in the Detroit region yet had this problem. Flint's had a few issues. But the reality is, for the jobs of the future, they're not all going to neatly fit into the vacant office space in Southfield or Detroit or Troy, right? We have to look at what are the needs. Even Macomb County has done a beautiful job with the old Romeo engine plant that Ford owns, right? It's vacant now. They closed it down about a year ago, and they're cleaning it up. And, Romeo and Macomb County are very aggressive to say what could happen next here. Well, here's the problem. Every time I get a call, why can't we put the battery plant that announced somewhere else there? It's not built for a battery plant. It's not the shape of a battery plant. It doesn't have the right floor depth for a battery plant. So you're not just gonna pop the newest, company technology in there. So why do people complain about it? I mean, it's the greatest mystery. It is a little bit of the not in my backyard, but I will say the preponderance are people in rural areas. I'm not picking on them. They don't want their lifestyle changed. But as agriculture changes in our country and the world, I just want to know, do you only care about this community until the day you die? Or are you cared about the future for your children and your grandchildren? Because then you really have to be very thoughtful about what are we going to do in our community? Or we'll just wait till we're all 6 feet under and then we can close shop. And I mean, I really probably with security around me would ask that question at a public meeting, because I think about my kids and, you know, my future grandchildren and what they will be able to do all the time. I'm really fortunate. My 2 kids have stayed in Michigan after college graduation, and I'm really grateful for that. But, you know, you want to make sure that your investments and your biggest investment, your children, in many cases, have things to do here and have a good lifestyle that I believe we have all enjoyed for the most part.
And RJ, to just piggyback on that, because you covered media, and I'm sure you've covered it both ways, especially when you worked with the Detroit News projects. Why do you think there is such backlash sometimes?
Change. People don't like change. I can remember doing stories on new retail centers going up in the suburbs, specifically one at Adams and Walton in Rochester Hills. And, you know, you get the story would appear, hey, this is coming, the developers have got the land and, you know, reasonably going to get the approvals through the city, and we report it. You get calls the next day. Well, how could you write that? You know, this isn't gonna happen, you know we're gonna defeat this. And then when the place finally opens, who's there waiting in line, first in line, are these people that have been complaining the whole time. So I think it just gets down to change. People, you know, are used to where they live, and you know, they don't want to have something new across the street. There's going to be more traffic, or you know, the kids can't be on the bikes anymore out there because of the traffic, and you know, and all these things. And I think people, I think to Maureen's point, they just get a little bit too myopic, and you got to really look at the big picture and how this is going to benefit. In a retail shopping center, it's going to be a lot more convenient, and people are going to use less gas. They'll be able to walk or take their bikes there. So, and it's a beautiful place. So
I can walk there.
yeah, perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it just gets down to change, and people just have their own ways of getting through that.
Cynthia, yeah, you want to add something?
Yeah, just a little something.
She'll yield you some time.
So, you know, yes, this is just something I tell audiences a lot about change, because people do resist change. You know, there's a certain generation in here that your first cell phone, you don't have to raise your hand, but your first cell phone was in a black bag, right? And now I carry around a computer with me, basically, anything I need to do. I approve bills, I write documents, you know, whatever you need to do. But I tell audiences, if you have not evolved as much as your cell phone, you're irrelevant. And that's the mindset we need to have in order to be thinking forward.
I don't know that I have anything to add to this. This has been great. I will say that, you know, I think we talk about we need to think of life beyond us. And I mean, none of us are under 30 here. So on the stage here, isn't that nice? But you know, so obviously we're thinking about others. I mean, that's why we do what we do, because we think there can be this bigger, greater world, and that's kind of what's exciting about it.
Why don't you also, I'm going to do a little reversal here, but why don't you talk a little bit about just the experience at the World Economic Forum? Just because I think it's kind of interesting. I know we have a lot of international folks here, but why don't you just say what it was like? Because you lived there in Switzerland for about a year, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it was great. First of all, I will tell you the average age of a fellow. Most of you are a fellow. And there's a number of fellows in the room. The average age of a fellow at the World Economic Forum is about 24. So my friend, I have a lot of the friends under 30 now. A really great friend, Britmer. It was a chance because we showcased Michigan in such a way that the World Economic Forum saw some of the work we did. As a matter of fact, LTU was a contributor to the first book that we wrote that the World Economic Forum saw and said, who wrote this? And that's kind of how we got to know them initially, was off that research that we had done with 8 academic institutions. And so I went over there to facilitate a global network of advanced manufacturing hubs. We ran the first one for the forum here. We were their pilot out of Michigan. They picked up 12 others in other countries, and then they asked me to come and do a fellowship where I would help turn that group of 13 disparate hubs around the globe into a cohesive unit. And I think that's one of the things that I like to do and I do well, is turning things into a cohesive unit. The experiences I had in Geneva, though, were far greater than the work experiences. A couple of the life experiences that I think are really important to think about how we live in the US. One is that everybody took the bus to work. So in the bus in the morning, the cleaning crews who were going into houses nearby the World Economic Forum, the senior level executives at the forum, senior level executives of other companies, they were all in the same bus together. So you get this kind of mass transit, how community feels like a community. You're interspersed with people in a way that's very different from how we do in the US. Similarly, my walking experience, I learned I called the crosswalks the cone of safety, because we have the painted white lines here, but in Geneva, and I've been to our European colleagues, in Geneva, long before you even get to the white line, like if I'm walking down a sidewalk, cars are stopping either way, in case when I get there, I might want to cross that white, that cross path. And the fact that it's an entire inversion of how I think we often think of things. We look at things in America on a freeway, everybody knows the 18-wheeler wins, and then the big SUV, and then the little SUV, and you kind of work your way down to a motorcycle, and heaven forbid you have a pedestrian out there. But it was an interesting flip, and it kind of reminded me of how we need to look at how we build a world. Like, how do we build a world from the bottom up, the pedestrian to the bicycler, to the motorcycler, and up as opposed to down. We don't have more power and we're gonna do more to you. We're going to do things with you. And that was the biggest take.
Did you go to Davos too while you were there? Or?
I had a colleague say, are you going to Davos with the forum? And I said, no, I was not that important to go to Davos. Only 2,200 people in the world. I'm not one of the 2,200 most important people in the world, apparently. I was surprised.
So it's about the size of Mackinac Policy Conference.
It really, it actually reminded me, a colleague of my dad's, life, you keep your friends forever. He was the CEO of a company in Liechtenstein, and I met with him and he said, have you been to Davos? And I said, no. He said, want to go to Davos? I said, sure. He said, it's 45 minutes. So I went to Davos. So I went to Davos to have a cup of coffee and a piece of pie with Guido, but it was really fun. But Davos reminded me, the town reminded me a lot of Petoskey. It's a small town, and apparently when you're there for the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, the storefronts you see in downtown, like there's no real the storefronts benefit, they get cash, but it's like Microsoft takes over the ski shop. So there are no ski shops when the event is going on. That stuff is all covered up and taken over by corporations. So I think it might lose some of its charm. I don't know. If I ever get to the real one, I'll let you know.
And I want RJ next to talk a little bit, just real quick, just the value of the book you wrote about with Frank Miller about the Chernobyl, because brownfields are so important. I don't think we pay enough attention in Michigan to how important we should be investing more in brownfields, just because of some things Maureen even brought up. But why don't you tell just a quick snippet of why you decided to write that book about it?
Well, in 2012, I met an inventor in Hamtramck by the name of Andrew Nimczyk, who moved here in 1984 from Poland. He had tried to escape 4 times. It was run by the Soviets. He was put in jail twice and was in 11 different prisons over the course of a year, but he finally made it here, worked at the Ford Rouge plant for years, and then in 2014, he and Frank Muller, who is from Switzerland, the banking community, came together in Hazel Park and started up a company called Exoterra, and Andrew is, for lack of a better term, a genius, and he has these different polyurethane tubes of different lengths and sizes and shapes that there's 4 different things that they do. One set of tubes, if this was a tree trunk, you would put 1, 2, 3, 4 around them. They go down 10 feet. He even built the drill out of his head, no drawings, to do it. And you put these tubes in, there's a slit in the side lengthwise, and nutrients and microorganisms and those things that have gone down 10 feet or so now get into that tube, and for lack of a better term, it's like shaped like an upside down tornado. And so these microbes go to the top of the tube, which are 3 feet from the ground. So they're 10 feet, the tube's 7 feet, and then here's your tree. And just at the edges of the roots, these microbes come out, nutrients, and they go right to the root level. And all of a sudden, the tree has everything that they need to, and they have studies now at the University of California, Riverdale, totally proving out that these tubes do not need fertilizer, they do not need pesticides, and the trees grow larger and more nutritious fruit. They also work for vines. They just did a test in Yuma, Arizona for crops, just obviously a shorter tube, but same concept, bringing those nutrients right where the plants need them. Another set of tubes gets rid of standing groundwater. So in rainstorms and those things, monsoons, so you can't have standing groundwater at golf courses for too long because the players want to play. Airports, obviously, those will attract birds and potentially get into the planes, the engines. Construction yards and playgrounds and places like that. Another set of tubes. Or 4,800 of them, Andrew designed for a 2.5 acre test site at Chernobyl. And they are getting rid of the ground radiation naturally. So again, these are longer tubes, and they're go down as much as 50 feet, and they have a slit in the side. And so when the reactor number 4 exploded in 1986, the radioactive nuclei attach themselves to the positrons, and these guys are hyper already, and so they became super hyper, and that's when you take a Geiger counter and you hear that clicking noise, that's those guys. And and they kind of go in waves, and they just sort of stay in the general area. So Andrew, with these tubes, again, the slit in the side, and the positrons get caught in there, and they go up to the top. And again, they're about 3 feet from the top soil. And this one, there's a cap on it with slits in the side. And so the positrons shoot out, and around each longer tube are 3 shorter tubes, and they attract electrons. And so, I don't know how he figured this out, but the positrons hit the electrons and explode, and they go back to their natural state, and the radioactive nuclei goes up to outer space, not right away, but it goes away. And so those tubes were installed in 2017, and in 18 months, the radiation was down 37%. Obviously, the war in Ukraine stopped the testing, but this summer they're going to get new tests from the team there, and I would suspect it's going to be down, 60-70%. So,
yeah, that was a good interview, because I had been to Chernobyl actually not long before that, and I couldn't believe there's like 5,000 people still living in the area, but they're mainly soldiers and scientists. But it's an important lesson, I think, for sustainability and for our own brownfields, which we're going to transition one more time over, though. Now, Maureen, your story, I want you to tell my favorite story, the Amazon story.
Which isn't really brownfield, but
No,
that's okay.
That's all right.
This is a very smooth transition.
No, it wasn't a good one.
We've known each other a long time, I can tell them that. So,
Nicer than normal.
there you go. When I was in Indianapolis, I went, and it's a longer story, but I went to jumpstart a program that had been dormant for 3-4 years, and that was the Indy Partnership, and that was their regional economic development effort, which used to be best of class, and it just kind of faded away for a lot of reasons. So they asked me to come down there, and as I said earlier, I commuted every weekend. My husband didn't move, my kids were at college, so I commuted up here, which wasn't horrible. And so I had been there about a year. I was actually on a train in Italy on a train mission, and we got an RFP from Amazon for their HQ2, their second headquarters. And once again, I was kind of new, but I thought, this speaks to me. I think we can do this in Indianapolis. So I actually hired a consultant while I was still in Italy. It's someone I knew, a site consultant. When I got back, interviewed creative agencies and put the team together. And it's a long, I have a book in me too on that whole thing, let me tell you, the Amazon HQ2 project. But, we got to top 20 in Indianapolis. That was a great day. That was our victory day, right? Because no one ever thought little old Indianapolis would be top 20. But here we were. Detroit did not get to top 20. And I'm not going to get into the reasons why I think that happened. Although at one point I called my buddies in Detroit and I said, why didn't you submit the train station? What's wrong with you? Well, I, at the time, didn't know that Ford was already in discussions on the train station. So we put together our region, brought them together. We put together a microsite to deliver our information to Amazon. Our proposal was killer. They only showed 2 to Jeff Bezos, and ours was one of them. We had 45 videos of the stories of our community, and it spoke to what was important to them. We listened to the customer, and we delivered what they wanted to hear about, what they wanted to learn about. So we got to the first round, we're final 20. We were probably about 4 or 5 in the end, because the number 2 guy at Amazon, his college roommate, actually lived in Indy, so we had a little bit of an edge on inside knowledge there. But, it really helped this community get together, leverage their assets. I guess there was a brownfield story. We had this beautiful site. We submitted 2 sites, but it was an old GM facility that was vacant, but it was right adjacent to downtown. You could walk to downtown, so there was a little bit of brownfield in there. But a couple of takeaways there: always listen to the customer. Think about the customer of the future. So we weren't thinking about what Amazon wanted today. We thought about what would they want in 10 or 20 years, and that was part of our presentation. Companies don't invest millions and billions about who's unemployed and available today. They want to know about the pipeline for the future. They're making an investment for 20 or 30 years. It was super fun. Like I said, I probably have a book worth of stories with me. The visit was crazy because no one ever found out when the visit was. We kept everything in confidence, and they kept bugging the mayor. They thought they knew the day because he had a 3-hour block on his calendar. That was actually a root canal he had scheduled. So it wasn't that. We snuck these people in. We showed them around. We had 36 hours, and they were really surprised to see, as we told our story. This is really, I think, a story about telling our story the right way that resonated with this audience, the company of the future, how they did the project, how they approached the talent question. One of the things we offered is, we had the lowest incentive package of any of the finalists, which was fine, and none was going to be subject to a vote of the city council. We wanted to avoid that chaos. But one of the things is the city had 10,000 homes that had reverted because of back taxes to the city. So 10,000 vacant homes that the city had. So we offered them to the Amazon employees for $1 a piece. Didn't cost the city anything. Would have a bunch of people coming into town, 10,000 with 6-figure incomes, so they could help neighborhoods be full again and not have vacant homes, put them back on the payroll. So it was a real creative way to think about what would be appealing, because no one in the country had 50,000 employees sitting around for these jobs. So you had to also be thinking about how we're going to attract people here. Well, that was one of the things that we offered, and it was, once again, it was pretty clever because it would have filled every vacant home in that city, and helped the neighborhoods, and helped attract talent to that. So, as I said, I could talk more about it, but I don't think I'll get a hook from Ed if I do. Is there anything else in the whole story that you know that you want me to share?
The only thing I was going to mention, not your specific story, but if anyone does know it, there's some really good articles written out there about the whole Amazon, like what people, across the United States. How many applications were there, like 100, 200?
Oh, no, over 500. And there were clearly communities that had no business.
Just in the US, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And some in Canada too. The Toronto proposal was actually really good because they're very good at attracting talent and keeping them there from other countries. We can do better, like Toronto. Toronto's killing us on attracting high-tech talent because they make it so much easier. So when we first got there, and here I am, I'm really the new kid in town. A couple of things, and I had people calling me, Gary, Indiana called, and Southern Indiana called, and they all wanted to do a joint proposal, and the state said, well, we should do a proposal together. And I said, first of all, they asked for regional, so state, just give me a good incentive package, we'll do the rest. And I did say, not to the governor, but I did say, I'm not gonna be the third tier on a 3-tab Indiana proposal. This is for the Indy region, and that's what we're gonna sell. And the governor, when he saw it, said this is the greatest thing he's ever seen come out, telling the story about Indiana. And so maybe because I was so new, I wasn't afraid of who I was gonna offend, right? When Amazon came for a visit, they didn't want to meet with elected officials. Chicago blew that. They had all their politicians there. I called the mayor and the governor. I said, they don't really want to see you on this trip. Okay, tell us what you need. So they trusted me with that. So the mayor filled every pothole on our route through the city, everyone, this is in March, and the governor had close to 1,000 huge bags of garbage picked up on the freeway from the airport to downtown Indianapolis. They contributed in other ways, but that was the one thing, it's like, well, this is kind of what we need now, can you fill the potholes? So they did that. So they were all in, and it was super fun, and it brought that region together for the first time, that they hadn't worked together before, and that is still paying dividends today.
Yeah, and you know, the reason that I did mention that is because that is a blueprint for how quickly what economic development needs could be from year to year even. Because as you saw, they picked two spots, one in Virginia and one in New York, and the New York one, they ended it pretty quickly when they got some background against it.
Yeah, so we figured they picked New York because they thought Cuomo was gonna run for governor, and in Washington, you know, Bezos just wanted to be by the power. So I went up to the governor of Indiana, Eric Holcomb, who's a great guy, said, you know what, I think we have to spread a rumor that you're gonna run for president. He said, there is no way you're gonna spread that rumor. I said, they won't take it seriously if it's me, so maybe you should be the person. And he's like, don't you dare. So, yeah, and the other thing, myth, they told us up front that they could split this project. So all the people who said, oh, they lied to everyone, that it could be in one place. I'm like, no, read the RFP. It said, we can split this project, right? So we hoped it had positioned us. And I do believe long-term, they learned about places like Detroit, which had a great proposal, and like Indianapolis, for their future growth that might not be 50,000 jobs. Heck, 5,000 jobs would be fabulous, right? So those communities were able to show off in that way as well.
Well, I'm going to, because we have some other written questions, I'm going to just ask you guys just two more questions. One is there any other trends that you think for the future that we should be focusing on? And we can start with you, I think, Cynthia, just because you deal with advanced manufacturing. And why don't you mention your board is actually not Michigan-based board?
Yes, so when we first, we're funded by MEDC, thank you, Oakland County, and Department of Energy. So we've got different funding, so it's state, regional, and national. And it was very important to me, and I talked with the governor because I felt that was my most important constituent out of the gate to say, oh, by the way, thanks for the money, you know, because those are our seed funding. I said, but we will not, just so you know, you won't be seeing a bunch of Michigan stories for a while. So we've only been in existence since October 2022. So we launched like a year and a half ago. We made the decision, and I made the decision that in order to be taken seriously, and to go back to being internal or external, we really needed to have a board. My leadership team advisors had to come from outside of the state. So I have one, and many of you know him, Mike Chico, the CEO of Fanuc Robotics for North America. Wonderful guy. He's my token Michigander. Everybody else is from Silicon Valley, Texas, Boston, New York. We kind of rimmed, I kind of looked at the country and said, how do I get taken seriously? Because we have an opportunity like this where the World Economic Forum says, okay, Cynthia, this is it, but you'll be the sole advanced manufacturing center, but make it work. Well, I gotta make it work, and I had to kind of lean into, it's a very petite woman in the office today saying sometimes she likes to feel taller, and I felt like I had to become like 6 foot tall and say, oh yeah, we're national, but it's a hard sell. But what we did was we got incredible supporters from, Flex and GE Healthcare and Western Digital. I'm trying to think about going down the coast. Schneider Electric, that are outside of the Michigan ecosystem, so that we can start to say what's really happening in the nation and in the world. And several of those companies are global headquarters over in Europe, so they're not even American-based companies. So it's a different way to look at it. But it was important that we get outside of ourselves so we can be truly analytical and say, what are we good at? What do we need to improve at? Who's beating us? How are they beating us? And to Maureen's point with the collaboration, one of the things we just came from DC. I was there last week. She and I think, pass in the air a little bit, but on occasion. But I was in DC last week with a group when we talked with, we had 5 states represented at the highest level of talent to talk about, can we collaborate? And they're all 5 what I would call manufacturing-centric states. Can we collaborate as we build out battery and EV plants on talents that can cross borders. Because if you build a plant in Kentucky and you work a year and a half to get all the talent places in place, and you really feel confident, to your point about we can move here, we can hire 1,000 people, you know you're gonna get the right talent, and then you decide you wanna expand, people think when they come to the US from other countries that we're all one happy country, and we sort of are, but we all know it's not like that. So then you go from Kentucky and you decide to add a plant in Indiana or Tennessee or Wisconsin or Michigan or Ohio, and it's a whole new set of rules, it's a whole new set of talent options, it's a whole new thing. So we said, what we've asked people to do is take the talent training component out of your economic development toolkit. Let's share it and decide that we are better off as a nation to attract big projects around the world to the US first, and then it will land in one of these manufacturing states because it's about manufacturing. So I think that that's one of the trends we're seeing. When I kind of joke about it, but it's not a good joke. I've seen people, they come here for the IRA, and they sometimes go to Mexico because they're
Mention
right at the
IRA,
border.
I'm trying to remember what the acronym
It's
is.
Infrastructure
Reinvestment Act.
Reinvestment Act, yeah.
Right.
So the Infrastructure Reinvestment Act has billions of dollars in it for manufacturing, for attraction. So people do come here because there's opportunities right now for people from around the globe to build businesses in Michigan and to grow businesses or in the US, to grow business here. But sometimes, all of those incentives aside, it's easier for a company to maybe go to Mexico where they're met at the border with, hello, how many people would you like? What kind of training do you want? And there's more of a customer service that's drawing people in. So what we don't want people to do is come here for the economic programs we're offering at the federal level and then go somewhere else because we're so busy quarreling about these little things that we can't collaborate. So we're doing on the national level what Maureen had to do in the regional level in Indiana to get a win. You can't please everybody, but you gotta kind of start somewhere and make sure that you're doing the best for the nation. So that's how we're.
No, that's an excellent point. RJ, would you kind of approach that maybe from like what do you see from the media perspective as trends that maybe we don't even see because you might see it just because of headlines and things like that?
Advanced computer chips. We have all the natural resources to produce those. Robotics is going to be huge. I tell all my nieces and nephews, get into robotics. Healthcare will continue to be an amazing market. And then aerial taxis. So in addition to, let's say you land at LaGuardia and you need to be down in Manhattan, you can get there in 7 or 8 minutes in an aerial taxi. They can also move cargo. They can also, if you're hiking, say in the Rocky Mountains and you break your ankle, this medvac can come very, very close to you and you get loaded in and you're being treated as you're going to the nearest hospital, so that's really a lifesaver. And then for military, in terms of moving freight and back and forth and things like that. And all of those are super high technical jobs, and Lawrence Tech does an amazing job pretty much in all of those industries. So that's where I see what's coming, and I think Michigan, in Detroit especially, we can build things at precision and at scale. If you look at California, Apple and Microsoft and some of the others took a turn in building autonomous vehicles. They never showed up. And it's very, very difficult to produce vehicles and medical devices and other things at scale, and we do that very, very well. Plus, we're blessed with natural resources. Our top 3 industries are manufacturing, tourism, and then agriculture. We have 20%, as you know, of the fresh water supply around us. So when you're looking at the entire world and you look at a place like here, there's a lot of things going on.
So what RJ was referring to, our eVTOL, remember that? Electric vehicle takeoff and landing. Like the Jetsons is finally getting here, right? When I was little, I thought that's what life was gonna be like. We're getting closer. So think about eVTOL. So I'm gonna take a little different tactic on what I think the future is going to be like, and I hope that the efforts that we put together on our EDA grant that I spoke about at Brookings are a trend for this region, and that is actually working together as a collaborative region. You know, economies are regional, supply chain is regional, talent is regional, or else there'd be no traffic on I-75 every morning, right? If everyone, like back in the day, worked where they live. So that's why our approach to economic development is regional. When we put together our proposal for the EDA Build Back Better Regional Challenge, the Detroit Regional Partnership was asked by quite a few partners in the area, you know, you're regional and you're neutral and you're based on a cluster strategy, which we are, so we want you to lead this. Now you're not allowed to ask me today if I would do it again. It was a boatload of work. But with and several of you in the room were partners, sub-recipients of the funds. So out of 550 applications around the country, they funded 21, and we were one. It's the global epicenter of mobility. It really is to look this change. When you talk about change, we are transitioning from not just internal combustion engine to electric vehicle, and that is one thing, but it's really the whole landscape of mobility and clean tech and how that is our future. So we wanted to ensure, and I was very clear to the EDA with this, but we wanted to ensure that our entrepreneurs, our small and medium-sized businesses, and our talent could meet the moment and make this transition, because we've been tripped up a few times in this region. And I said, please don't give us these funds because you feel sorry for Detroit. Give them to us because we learned our lesson in 09 and 10, those of us who were around then, and we're proactively looking at how to have a control on our future and meet the moment. 1 in 10 jobs in this country is related to the auto industry, back to auto. But when you look at mobility, we had to put together for our grant application, what support entities do you have for this sector that you want to accelerate? For mobility, we already had over 400 existing programs or efforts to support mobility in this region. There was nowhere in this country and nowhere in this world that can make that claim. But everyone's gunning for it, right? They all want to take it from us. So that's why we put this together. You know, it has a very strong research component, a very strong DEIJ component, because guess what? Small and medium-sized businesses don't have the capacity to do research on the technologies of the future, which we're doing right now, related to mobility. That will be followed by the skill sets of the future needed to make those technologies. So this collaborative effort, we had 140 people who participated every week. The worst thing for me is we never met in person. So every week, many of you saw me on the screen. Everywhere I go now, people are like, oh, Maureen, it's great to see you. And I'm like, you were one of 90 people on the screen. Where's your name tag? I'm joking. I'm getting to learn them all. But it was, to me, it was very exciting. So we received $54 million. That did not go into my budget exclusively. That would have been great, but that didn't happen. I was as excited to get that and be one of 21 in this country and present it to President Biden as I was that this region worked together. 5 years ago, we wouldn't have done that. We would have had 5 separate applications from this region. None of them would have been aligned. None of them would have been strong enough on their own, and we wouldn't have won. So I think this is a trend for our future of this region that we have, and we've learned it's successful. We didn't have anyone go rogue on us, right? Everyone participated in the right way. We had everyone from the OEM supporting us, to the unions, to the foundation, philanthropic community, to the universities, to the business community here. When we work together that way, we're a lot more powerful and we win. And so that's what I hope by 2050, that will be just standard of how we did it. And I've had the privilege to testify at Congress about, well, how did the Detroit region work together for this? Can you imagine how exciting that was when, I know a few years ago, that was not happening here. And you know, I had Congress people from around the country asking me that question. And it was because we were inclusive in what we did and we were transparent in what we did. And that's how we won. And that's what I want the future for my children and my grandchildren to look like.
And that'll probably be our last question, but I always worry, because I'm a huge science fiction movie buff, I'm always worried about the future. If it's going to be more like Blade Runner in the future, or if it's going to be more like Wakanda and Black Panther. But I hope it's more like Wakanda with the taxis and everything. But I want to thank again Maureen and RJ and Cynthia for coming here today, and I appreciate you telling us all these good information, and hope everybody enjoyed it too. But thank you.